Welcome to episode number 2 of Sound Off Inbox here on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off podcast. I am the Solomonster, and we had a successful pilot episode last month. I got a lot of positive feedback from all of you guys, a lot of questions sent in. A lot of you wanted to see more of these inboxes with some video worked in there. I don't know why, but hi. So this is episode 2. And the way this works is I just answer a random series of your questions that you've submitted to me. Some of you have emailed them to me. I'll tell you how to do that in a second. You could also leave a question in the comment section down below this video. I'm going to be looking at some of those questions as possible questions for episode number 3. So you've got 2 different ways you can submit questions. The solomonster@gmail.com. And always, please include your name and where you are from when you write in. It's very important. Or you can leave your question down below in the comments section of this video. So hopefully we'll get to do more of these more frequently. Been very busy lately. October, November. It's been too much wrestling going on. Now we're heading into the holidays. So I'm hoping I'll have a little bit more free time. So that's it. We're going to get into your questions here. Oh, by the way, give this a thumbs up if you like and want to see more of these. Thumbs up on this video. First question comes from David Scott, who did not include where he is from, so we'll say Earth. When will Vince McMahon grab up Tessa Blanchard? Easily the best women's wrestler in the business. A Charlotte-Tessa feud seems to be a natural fit in the future. Well, I've talked about this on my show before. It's absolutely a natural fit. You've got these two, third generation? I guess in Charlotte's case, second generation, but in Tessa's third generation. Female stars, descendants of some of the original members of the Four Horsemen. To me, it's a natural match. It's a natural feud. And it's going to be a WrestleMania main event one day. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't know when Tessa's going to end up working for WWE. I do think eventually she'll migrate there. Look, it could be years down the road. Maybe she stays with Impact. You know, she supposedly has many more months left on her deal there. If she's happy, maybe she stays. Maybe she goes to AEW. Her father's working there. Not that that necessarily means anything, but I do think that's the inevitable match, and it will be a WrestleMania main event one day. Not a doubt in my mind about that. You've heard me mention that a whole bunch of times on the podcast. Would you say Velveteen Dream is playing a toned-down version of Goldust? That's from Dallas in Kentucky. I don't think he's playing a toned-down version of Goldust. He might be incorporating elements of the Goldust character, possibly, into what he's doing. Look, I think he's making it his own, but I think you could say he's borrowing from Gorgeous George. You could say he's borrowing from Adrian Street. Why does it have to be only Goldust? He might be taking bits and pieces from each of these different personalities. Look at Goldust. Where did Goldust kind of model his persona from? I don't know. Maybe he's talked about it in interviews before. He may have also borrowed from some of those guys I just mentioned. So everybody does that. Everybody takes a little bit from someone else. But I think he's trying to forge his own path. He's doing his own thing. He's putting his own spin on it. And I think he's going to be a big star as long as he can stay healthy. He's out right now. But I think it's kind of unfair to suggest that he's just modeling his entire character off of Goldust. I mean, Goldust is somebody that I think, we'll look back on many years from now and probably appreciate that character even more, and all the work he put into it. It was a very unique character at that time, back in the mid-90s. The stuff he was doing, you just weren't seeing that. Certainly not on WWE television. It was still very cartoony, very PG. The guy's rubbing Razor Ramon's nipples in the middle of the ring. I mean, come on. Thankfully you weren't seeing too much of that back then. I don't see Velveteen Dream doing that. I don't see him doing that to some of the other people in NXT. So he just needs to do his own thing. I wouldn't say it's just a Goldust thing. Now we get into some tough questions here. Oh, man. Hard day's work. Come home. You're parched. You like my shirt? I don't know if you can see it. Ladies? No? Anyway. Had I'm a mess. Had ECW and WCW survived, would they still be around today? And would companies like Impact, ROH, and even AEW have been formed? Well, TNA filled the void that was left by WCW. Ring of Honor filled the void that was left by ECW. You know, Gabe Sapolsky was involved in Ring of Honor. He was a descendant. It's not really the word I'm looking for, but protege of Paul Heyman. So that's why I say, you know, TNA, WCW void, Ring of Honor, ECW void. Not as violent, but that style of wrestling, I think, was more comparable, ROH and ECW. And a lot of ex-WCW and ECW employees went to go work there. In fact, a ton of them went to go work for TNA and Ring of Honor. So it's safe to say that those two would not have been around had WCW lived on and ECW have lived on. They filled that void, that vacuum that was left when those two promotions went, you know, belly up. So no, they wouldn't be around. I don't believe WCW or ECW would be around today had they survived beyond 2001. You got to remember, it's almost 20 years. Was it 18 years this year? Or in 2019? It's a long time. It's a long time. So I don't believe that either one would still be around today. You know, the wrestling bubble burst in the 2000s. As the decade went on, wrestling became less and less popular. Even today, for all the money they make, wrestling's not that cool. It's not the in thing, not like it was 20 years ago. I don't think wrestling would have been able to sustain three big organizations like that. The weakest ones were going to fall off, and the weakest ones were going to be ECW and WCW. They just did not have the money and the resources behind them that Vince McMahon had. So Vince would have survived. He would have gotten bruised, you know, if the economy took a downturn, if wrestling wasn't as popular, but he would have been okay. The other companies, you know, WWE found different ways to make money. That was the most genius thing that Vince McMahon could do. So they're not just making money on tickets. They're not just making money off pay-per-views. It's merchandise and toys and licensing deals and just all different types of ways that they're making. And today, forget about it. Now you got the network. You know, even today, look, when the product is not at its best, when the product, you know, they're losing viewers year over year. I was just talking about this the other day on the podcast. You look at the Monday Night Raw ratings. Year over year, they are losing viewers, especially since Raw moved to 3 hours. Every single year, the audience gets less and less and less and less. And still, they soldier on. Billion-dollar TV contracts, multi-million-dollar Saudi Arabia deal. Those are the deals that it's keeping this company afloat and safe and insulated from any kind of external factors that any other year might do real serious damage to the company. So I will give Vince McMahon and his band of merry men all the credit in the world. They've done a very good job of protecting the company in the event of some kind of catastrophe that might happen. At what expense? All this television, burning out their audience, you know, killing off some of their fan base. In the long run, I think it's going to come back to bite them on the ass. I think it's already starting to come back and bite them on the ass, quite frankly. But they'll be okay. WCW, of the two promotions, if I had to say which one do I think would have a better chance of being around today, I'd say WCW maybe. If they could have gotten on Spike the way that TNA did in the mid-2000s. But TNA didn't get on Spike until 2005. You know, so they were kicked off Turner, WCW was, in 2001. There's no Spike deal that early. So I don't see how they last, frankly, without television. I just don't think it's realistic. When you go to Neil in Chicago, I don't hate the Dark Order, but I cannot buy into Evil Uno and Stu Grayson as the leaders. What if the Dark Order had a different pair of leaders in AEW? Interesting question. The pair I'm thinking of is Katrina and Mil Muertes. Big Lucha Underground fan here. Sure, they probably can't use those names, but I think that pairing with that gimmick would be a great addition. I'm sure there are some legal restrictions with Lucha Underground contracts, but let's forget about that. Oh yeah, sure. Let's just forget about that. Pesky contracts. Let's just forget about that. No, it's a good question. I think part of the issue with Uno and Grayson, because I've talked about this on my show, my opinion, I'm not a huge fan at all of the Dark Order gimmick. Uno and Grayson are very good wrestlers. They've impressed me in a lot of their matches that I didn't really care about going into them, and by the time they're over, I'm looking at it, I'm going, hey, they're pretty good. Them as the leaders of this dark faction, it's like, who cares? I look at these two guys and I cannot buy into them as the leaders of this evil, dark faction of wrestlers. Let's be honest here. Talented as they are, 20 years ago, Grayson, Uno, they would be the Midian and the Viscera of the ministry. They would be bit players in the background. You know it's true. So to go to your question, I think it's a great idea. It's not going to happen. But I do think that Katrina, Katrina, come on, Mil Muertes, I love Mil Muertes too. Great character. I loved the two of them as a pairing in Lucha Underground. I thought were just perfect together. You bring those two in to lead a group, maybe with Grayson and Uno as the henchmen or somewhere in the background, and I might be able to buy into it a little bit more. That actually might help out a lot, I think. Right now, it's just the two of them and a bunch of dudes in a mask that we don't know. They're just a bunch of creepers going around the ring, and it's like, who cares? Who cares? I think they're actually really hurt by that gimmick. I really do. They're two talented guys, but I don't think that gimmick really does them any favors. Richard, in Columbus, Ohio, I remember watching a shoot interview with Shawn Michaels from early 2000, the one where he has a whole pack of chew in his mouth. And he mentions that in the early 90s, he would write the Monday Night Raw episodes. This is the only time he mentions it, and I've heard no one else talk about it since. Is there any truth to this? I remember that, and I can't find that interview anywhere on the internet. Believe it or not, I think it's been scrubbed. Because I was going to go back and take a look at what you were talking about. I don't have any memory of him mentioning that. I don't doubt that he did. I've never heard any stories of Shawn Michaels writing episodes of Monday Night Raw in 1993, 94, 95. First I'm hearing of it. Maybe somebody who hears this question, if they've read something, maybe Shawn in his book mentioned this or in some other interview, maybe you can chime in the comments section. But that's news to me. I don't know creatively how he would have done, if that would have made the shows better or worse. Maybe we can blame Shawn for Friar Ferguson and Bastion Booger. Or just put the blame on him. Shawn was in a very different place back then. He was doing a lot of things. Maybe that's why we had all those gimmicks in 95. I always thought it was just Vince McMahon on an acid trip. Maybe he was dropping acid with Shawn Michaels and they were writing the shows together. That would actually make a lot of sense. After all, the Clique had all the power back then. Jeff, in East Hartford, Connecticut, I recently watched a shoot interview with Steve Blackman. Love Steve Blackman. And he talked about how he had heat with Vader following a tour of Japan. Do you have any more information on this? All I know is the same thing that Blackman talked about in that shoot, if it's the one I'm thinking of, the RF video one that he did, when he was in Japan in the early 90s. Because there might be a lot of people who say, oh, Steve Blackman, that guy who did Head Cheese with Al Snow in 2000 in WWF, who may not know that, he was a wrestler many, many years earlier, and he wrestled overseas. He got very sick. I think he had, like dengue fever, or he had, I was going to say chlamydia. He might have had chlamydia, but he had some awful illness that I think he almost died from. And he was sick for many years. I mean, he wasn't sick for a week or a month. He was sick for years. His career basically hit a wall. It was over. And it was life or death for a while there for Steve Blackman. And eventually he came back to wrestling and he popped up in WWE. But when he was in Japan in the early 90s, Vader and Buzz Sawyer made this guy's life a living hell. Buzz Sawyer is someone who had a terrible reputation. If you listen to other shoot interviews and you read interviews that other wrestlers have done who knew him and worked with him, trained with him, they don't have a lot of very nice things to say about him, other than he was a great worker and he took great bumps. Go look up some of the bumps that Buzz Sawyer took. There was one actually on Twitter. Somebody posted a video just about a couple weeks ago on Twitter. It might have been in a match with Jerry Lawler, and Sawyer's in the ring. He took a punch, and this guy off one, I think it was a Jerry Lawler punch, he flew through the ropes out of the ring. You got to see it to believe it. So I'm sure he was very talented and a great bump taker and a great wrestler, but apparently as a human being, he was lacking. In fact, I just watched this morning the Undertaker interview. Undertaker sat down with Stone Cold Steve Austin, the Broken Skull sessions on WWE Network, and he talked about Buzz Sawyer because he was trained. He paid Buzz $2,500 to train him when he was green, first getting into the wrestling business, didn't know, a wrist lock from a wristwatch, and he paid Buzz $2,500 to train him. And Undertaker talked in the interview about he never even saw the inside of a wrestling ring. He showed up at Buzz's, I think his house, rang the bell, the guy came out, he was training him right there, I think in the front yard. Very basic moves. Never worked inside of a ring, hit the ropes, anything like that. So basically Buzz fucked him out of $2,500. He didn't sound like he got a whole lot out of lessons with Buzz Sawyer. The only thing he got out of it was, I guess Buzz had to leave to go to another territory. He showed up one day waiting for his next lesson, looked inside the house, nobody was there except the two Rottweilers that he left behind. I don't know if he left the dogs with food and water, he just left his dogs behind. So Undertaker said, well, I got to get something out of this, I'm taking the dogs. So, I guess Undertaker's a dog guy. I don't know if he kept them or if he said they had good homes. So that made it sound like maybe he gave them away. I don't know if he kept them or not, but Undertaker certainly is one person who does not think very highly of Buzz Sawyer as a human being. So anyway, Buzz and Vader made Blackman's life in Japan a living hell. I don't know what that means. Was it just general bullying, ribbing? Did they physically beat him up? Did they do other heinous things? I don't know. But he says they made his life a living hell. Fast forward to 1996 or 97. I know Blackman debuted in 97, but I think he might have had a tryout or something the year before in 96 with WWE. And he shows up, he's backstage at a show, and he sees Vader. Now, he has not forgotten what Vader did to him all those years earlier. And he makes a beeline for Vader. He is going to kick the shit out of this guy. And I know Vader's a big, tough guy, but I don't doubt for a second that Steve Blackman would just absolutely mop the floor with him. I think it was Bob Holly in his book. Bob Holly, another one who fancied himself a tough guy and was kind of used as an enforcer in the company for a number of years. I think it was Bob Holly who said, yes, Blackman was maybe the one guy on the roster at that time you did not want to mess with. And JBL made that mistake, and you did not want to fuck with Steve Blackman. So he makes a beeline for Vader. Vader sees him coming, and Vader starts apologizing before anything can happen. He is so apologetic. So in the end, Blackman didn't do anything because he said, boy, I'm going to look like an asshole if I start beating up a guy who's apologizing profusely to me in front of everybody here. So he didn't do anything. And he said, as he got to know Vader a little bit more, he said he changed. He changed a lot from the way he had been years earlier. So nothing came of it. But that's the story. That's the story. And in fact, when Blackman made his debut, if you remember on Monday Night Raw in 97, I believe it was as a fan. And I think, did he attack Vader? Or did Vader come at... Vader, I think, was in the segment. I don't know if he went after Vader. I don't remember all the details about it, but Vader was involved. They might have been tag team partners at Survivor Series that year. So, see, I look at it like this. There's an old expression that I think is very true. Be nice to people on your way up, because those people are the same ones that you're going to see on the way down. And I just think that's so true. Let's take another question here. Adrian, in Austin, Texas, if The Undertaker would have faced the imposter Undertaker, Bryan Lee, at WrestleMania instead of SummerSlam in 1994, would he have broken his own streak by defeating himself? I suppose so. I suppose so. I don't really know how to answer that question, but sure. Technically, he would have beaten himself, and that would have been the end of the streak. I never really thought about it that way. David, in Dallas, Texas. I was watching Raw clips on YouTube, and I saw a segment involving Stephanie McMahon, my condolences, and Chris Jericho with some people in ape costumes in the recommended list. Yeah, YouTube has a funny way of recommending weird videos. I don't know how the algorithm comes up with this. I got some weird ones too. I won't get into what they are. Was creative on the bubbly when this happened, and do you remember this? I do remember that, in fact. The Apes you saw that night were members of the WWE creative team. No, I'm kidding. They were promoting the new Planet of the Apes movie. I mean, there's been... How many of them have there been? 5? 6? I don't even know. I was never a Planet of the Apes fan. King Kong, all that. Who cares? But they were promoting this new Planet of the Apes movie that was coming out. It was like a 1-week thing, and so they had these guys come out in ape costumes. It was the movie with Marky Mark. Planet of the Apes with Mark Wahlberg. And so Jericho, the whole point of this whole stupid segment, which was over in front of the crowd because Jericho was great. Every time he would berate Stephanie, it was very entertaining. But the whole point of this was just to set up a spot at the end of the segment where Jericho would throw a pie in Stephanie's face. He would pie her in the middle of the ring. That was it. That was the whole point. And I guess by seeing the apes, that would make you want to go see the movie? I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to think back to the segment now, and one of the things that I recall, this was during the phase where Stephanie McMahon was the owner of ECW. What a success that was. And she was coming out to Drowning Pool's Let the Bodies Hit the Floor. And it was only for a few months, because then 9/11 happened, the 9/11 attacks, and they did not want to use that song for obvious reasons. You don't want to use the song Let the Bodies Hit the Floor when 3,000 people just died. And Raw's War went away. It wasn't War anymore. Now it was back to being WWE Raw, or WWF Raw, so they made a lot of changes. But for a few months there, she was using that as her theme song. And I remember during this phase, I would laugh every single time Jericho would come out to insult her. And he would say, let the boobies hit the floor. Because I'm like 8 years old. Not really 8 years old, but I have a sense of humor of an 8-year-old. But what was really funny about it was Stephanie, her chest was gigantic. She had implants put in, but they were just enormous. I don't know what the other way to put it. They were gigantic. I'm surprised she didn't tip over. So he would come out and say, let the boobies hit the floor. Maybe he only did it once. I don't know if he did it more than once. I would laugh every single time, though. I always liked the interplay between Jericho and Stephanie. Big difference, huh? Between then and now. How many people now get one over on Stephanie McMahon? Back then, Vince McMahon, Stephanie McMahon, they didn't care. Everybody could come out and insult them. Vince McMahon would get beat up every week and take bumps. It was great. Now it's like, oh, all hail the almighty McMahons, and you get one over on them. It's very rare these days. Let's go to Luke in Maricopa, Arizona. It's safe to say we're both fans of John Carpenter and his contributions to the art of horror movies. Absolutely. One of my favorite directors. With that being said, which Carpenter film do you think is better, Halloween or The Thing? It's like asking me to pick a favorite child. The original Halloween, 1978, I believe, and The Thing, which, not the original one from the 50s, the reboot that Carpenter did, or his version of it from 1982. Two of the best movies, two of my favorite movies that I've ever seen. I like that whole genre. I like a lot of his films, Escape from L.A., Escape from New York. I'm the weird one who never saw Escape from New York until after I saw Escape from L.A., so I like Escape from L.A. Most people think it's shit. I like it. He did a movie called Body Bags, which was, I think, meant to be on Showtime, and it ended up being like a TV movie. It was going to be a television series. It got abandoned, so it just ended up becoming a movie. Ghosts of Mars. I mean, I like his work. Halloween is, to me, just the quintessential horror Halloween movie. I mean, it has Halloween in the title. But I am a big fan of the fact that you don't get to see Michael Myers all that much in the original movie. That is a movie that is based off of dread and fear. And you don't have, I don't think, any blood in the original movie. There's no blood, there's no gore. It's all about making you feel very uneasy and uncomfortable and what's coming around the corner, and you see the shape, as they called him, and the music, and I love it. I love it. The Thing is almost just a totally different movie. The Thing is scary as all hell. It uses practical effects, so you're not relying on CGI, and I am a huge fan of the practical effects that you used to see in those movies a lot back all those years ago. It's a really disturbing movie. I mean, it really is. If you've never seen it, but you're into those kind of movies, first of all, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's a genuinely disturbing, horrifying movie. The effects are great. The scares are great. Kurt Russell's in it, so how bad could it be? But if you force me to make a choice, I'm going to go with Halloween. I mean, come on, man. It's my movie. I can't vote against Halloween. Like I said, it's like asking me to pick between two of my children. You're asking me to pick a favorite. I mean, every parent, I'm sure, has a favorite child. They may not admit it, but let's be honest, you do. Case in point, I'm sure I was the favorite here in my family. I'm sure of it. Two great movies, but Halloween. I mean, there's no way I can vote against it. It would be impossible. Let's do a couple more. Oh boy. What do you think is the greatest song ever made? That question comes from Troy in Brownsville, New York. When I cut and pasted that in here, I was thinking about it. I don't want to think about it too much because I like to think about it here. But Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin. Best song ever made. And now everybody's going to come after me. Oh, Bohemian Rhapsody and whatever other weird choices you people are going to have and you're going to throw in my face. Stairway to Heaven. Led Zeppelin. There's just something about it. There's something about the beat. There's something about the vibe. Of course, the guitar towards the end. Obviously, it's classic. I wasn't even born when that song was made. But it's timeless. And I like Bohemian Rhapsody. First time I ever heard Bohemian Rhapsody was in Wayne's World. But, again, it's a little before my time. But I know people like to compare the two a lot as far as which song is better, which song is the best. You can't go wrong with either one, but, in my opinion, Stairway to Heaven is the best. And I bet that there were a lot of you thinking, oh my God, he's going to pick a Hall & Oates song. I'm shocked. How could he not pick a Hall & Oates song? I thought about it. That would be number 2. Out of Touch, or as I call it, the Vince McMahon anthem. No, Out of Touch is probably my second favorite song. No joke. And we'll end with this. What is the backstory on Hulk Hogan burning a copy of the Wrestling Observer newsletter on a WCW pay-per-view in 1995? That comes from Stuart in Pompano Beach, Florida. This was quite the segment. And if anybody listening was not watching wrestling at the time, or you're too young, you don't really know from WCW. I wasn't a big WCW fan myself at that point. I became more so later on in the Monday Night War period. I was aware of what was going on in WCW at that time, but I was always a WWF guy. And 95 was a horrible year for WWF. It had some bright spots. Bret Hart was doing his thing. Owen Hart, Hakushi. It wasn't all bad, but it was pretty bad. And I came very close early that year to just giving up altogether. So that's how bad it got. But WCW wasn't much better. For God's sakes, you had Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man fending off the Dungeon of Doom. Taskmaster, Kamala, Shark. Remember Shark? It was a fucking John Tenta Shark. The Zodiac or the Booty Man or the fucking whatever the hell he was. It came 15 different names Ed Leslie had. I guess he would have been Zodiac back then. WCW wasn't much better. But where this came from, this was the infamous "Observe This, Brother" promo. It was Halloween Havoc, 1995. Hulk Hogan was going through maybe a midlife crisis. He was going through a dark period with his character. He was testing the waters for a heel turn. I have no doubt that's what this was intended to be. He or they were testing the waters for a heel turn. He was basically NWO Hogan. He was dressed in all black. He didn't have his mustache at the time, which was strange. But he was decked out in all black as he was feuding with the Giant and the members of the Dungeon of Doom. And so they get to Halloween Havoc, and Mean Gene is conducting an interview on a stage in the back of the arena, or somewhere in the arena, in front of the crowd. Hogan comes out with his two best friends in the world, Macho Man Randy Savage and Sting. And Hogan, at the beginning of the interview, he takes all of his black clothing and he throws it into, I think it was a garbage can. I haven't watched the segment in a long time. But he put all the clothes in a garbage can and he sets it on fire. It bursts into flames. And he's back wearing the red and yellow, and Hulkamania is back, brother. That wasn't even the weirdest part of this. He breaks kayfabe. This is where things get really weird. He breaks kayfabe, and he starts going off on Randy Savage. His arm had been taped up for months in WCW. I don't remember if it was he tore his, it was either his bicep or his tricep. It was one or the other. And I think his arm on that show was the injured arm was literally half the size of the other arm. So it was very clear that he was suffering from a legitimate injury. But it had also been worked into the storylines. So he had a bum arm. Hogan insists, not a real injury. Not a legitimate, I think legitimate was the word he used. Not a legitimate injury. His arm is 100% fine. Because he, I guess, wanted to swerve the Dungeon of Doom or whatever his ridiculous explanation was for it. In the middle of all of this, he has in his hand a rolled up copy of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. He's got Meltzer's newsletter in his hand. This is Hulk Hogan, the biggest wrestling personality in the world. And they're live on a WCW pay-per-view. And this guy has a copy of the Wrestling Observer in his hand. And back then, Meltzer was merciless. I mean, I think Hogan won a whole bunch of awards. Worst this, worst that, worst feud, worst wrestler. So I'm sure Hogan had no love lost for Dave Meltzer. Anyway, he calls it a rag sheet. This is what we call a rag sheet. And, it said the Giant was going to win the title tonight, and it said the Macho Man was hurt, and basically don't believe everything you read, and it's all bullshit, and it's not true. And the funniest line, he goes, "This thing here is like a dinosaur, brother." He goes, The internet is where it's at. The internet has all the scoops." He's putting over the internet. Hulk Hogan was 20 years ahead of his time. Internet has all the scoops. And then the infamous line, "Observe this, brother." And he takes the observer. And actually, I want to put this on the screen here, because this is where things get really funny. So here you see, and I'll explain what you're looking at here in a second. But he takes the observer and he throws it into this raging inferno off camera that we can't see. But what we can see is smoke billowing up. And the entire time Hogan is blathering on about the observer, the look of concern, and this is what you're looking at now, there was a look of genuine concern on the faces of Randy Savage and Sting. Because Hogan is in the zone. Hogan's going off on Meltzer. He's got his agenda. He's doing his promo. There's no interrupting the Hulkster. These other two are just standing there. Savage is pacing back and forth. They're well aware of this fire that is beginning to rage uncontrollably within a few feet of them. And Sting, you gotta watch this. You gotta go bring up the video. Sting is like fucking Smokey the Bear out there trying to put this fire out. You know, if Smokey had face paint and a crop top, I think you see here in the image, he had a bottle of water he fetched. Someone gave him a bottle of water off camera. He's pouring water on the fire. That didn't work. He tries fanning the flames. He's only making it worse. He was working so hard out there, trying not to get burned alive. And so to prove the dirt sheets wrong, they had Randy Savage wrestle that night. Not once, but twice. Now, he was wrestling anyway at the time. But it's like, we got to prove Meltzer and the rag sheets wrong. They had Savage wrestle the singles match, and then he came back and he wrestled in the 60-man battle royal, which he won later on in the night. But he wrestled the singles match against Lex Luger, which was a 5-minute match. His arm was all bandaged up. He clearly had a real injury that they were trying to work around. But hey, no, he's fine. He's fine. Right? 100% healthy. I don't know what was going on in Hogan's head through all this. He got a bee in his bonnet. Maybe Meltzer said something that just completely threw him off the deep end. To go back and watch this now, and again, put yourself in that mindset. This is 1995. I mean, today, forget about it. You hear about news websites and dirt sheets and all that. It's so commonplace now. This is in the middle of a WCW pay-per-view in 1995. And Hogan's cutting a promo on Dave Meltzer. You would think they were building to a match at Starrcade. It's going to be Meltzer against Hogan. You know what? Dave actually keeps himself in good shape. I don't doubt that Meltzer, you know, if Hogan had the 24-inch pythons back then, Meltzer probably had 21, 22. So Savage goes out there. He wrestles Luger. I think he lost. Comes back out, wins the Battle Royal. And in doing so, in working twice that night and continuing to work with a real injury, he aggravated his arm injury and made it worse. Way to go. And so I guess I hope it was worth it to try to prove Meltzer wrong, that he hurt himself even more. Here's the thing I don't get. Hogan's a weird guy. Hogan's a very weird guy. Why would you be so bothered to feel the need to go out on television and address the rag sheets, the observers, the torches of the world? Why would you even go on television and bring that up? How big do you think the audience was for that kind of stuff back then? I mean, there was a whole underground wrestling thing. Basically, it's like the RSPW audience is what it was. And I'm not saying that, you know, there were 10 people. But of the television viewing audience, how many of those people do you think ever even heard of a Wade Keller or a Dave Meltzer? All he was doing was giving them attention and potentially feeding them some business, because now people are going to be like, what, the rag sheets? I mean, my girlfriend's got a rag, but it's not that kind of rag. What's this guy talking about? And all of a sudden they go on the internet, they go on their fucking Netscape browser, and they start searching around, and they read about the Wrestling Observer. Why would you do that? Why would you potentially feed him business? Like, this is what was going on in his brain at the time. He was so bothered that, I guess Meltzer was saying mean things about him or wasn't a big fan of his work that he just went off the deep end. I don't know. He was in a weird place at that time, was Hogan. But yeah, I mean, you think about the smart fans back then. How many there were then relative to now? Now, forget about it. Everybody on the internet is a smart fan. But it's like, what are you doing? Why are you giving them the attention if you hate them so much and they're so unreliable? What is the point of any of this? But this is how insecure Hulk Hogan was. Maybe he still is. But back then, clearly he had some insecurities. Clearly. Biggest wrestling star in the world. And this rag sheet writer, as he called them back then, was living rent-free in his head. WCW. Killing kayfabe and exposing the business in 1995. Although I guess the Dungeon of Doom probably did a better job than anything of exposing the business in 1995, let's be honest. So anyway, that's the whole Observe This Brother promo. I could explain it, but you got to go find it. I'm sure you can go on the network, but I'm sure you can find it on Daily Motion or YouTube or something. If you've never seen it before, it's it's definitely something that everybody should go see. So we're going to wrap it up there. And I enjoyed this. And hopefully we'll do more of these more frequently. We're definitely going to do more of these. It's more a matter of how often am I going to be able to do it. Really that more than anything else. So if you have questions for me, you know how to submit them. You can email me, thesolomonster@gmail.com. You can leave a question down below in the comments section. I will try to get to as many of them as I can. Please keep them pithy, keep them as brief as possible. That will help a lot. But otherwise, this has been another episode of Sound Off Inbox here on the Solomonster Sounds Off YouTube channel. You can hit the sub button. That way when new inboxes go up, you'll get the notification. You can check out the live streams every week. We got the AEW live streams, the monthly pay-per-view live streams. Look down below, you see in the template how you can get the main podcast, all those different platforms and logos. It's all down there. So thank you very much for tuning in, guys. I'll be back real soon with a brand new inbox. Until then, why don't we do like the Bray Wyatt sign off? Firefly Funhouse. Bye! Bye! Bye!